Hi, my name is UC Light at New Growth Counseling Services in Carlsbad, and today I want to answer some listener questions I get all the time. One question I get by clients constantly is, why do I feel like I'm not good enough? It's a great question, and it's something that comes up a lot. To be honest with you, I don't know exactly why you don't feel like you're good enough. But the way I help people, and the way you can help yourself, is you can start to try to listen to your own self. I know that sounds a little strange, but one of the questions that I ask my clients that you can begin asking yourself is, when you say that you feel like you're not good enough, I ask, good enough for what? Or for who? Or in what situation are you not good enough? Some people will say, I don't perform well in a situation, and that's sort of specific. So yeah, you might be struggling with performance issues, and that's usually a matter of understanding what it is you need to learn and grow in order to perform better. However, if I don't feel good enough for my spouse or for my kid or for my coworker or boss, then it's a little different, because feelings you have are more rooted in relationship, and it would be important to understand those relationships and kind of how you see yourself in those relationships. Or why don't you feel good enough for what? To be in the role that you're in, like you feel like you're a fraud, like somehow you're the imposter and no one knows it except for you. So it's really important to understand when someone says, why don't I feel good enough? Like, for what purpose, or for what person, or for what role? And every time I do an interview like that and I seek to understand, 100% of the time I discover that there really is a part of you that believes that you're not good. And this is going to be a little awkward because I have to talk about a part of you, okay? And that part of you sees something in you, some other part of you. Maybe the way you perform, maybe the way you are received by someone you care about. It's hard to know. But there is a part of you that looks and sees something that it doesn't like and says, ooh, not good, not good enough. It's like a piece of yourself that's evaluating you. And I would encourage you to move carefully, but towards that piece of you. Because ultimately, the reason you don't feel good enough is coming from inside of you. And it's really a matter of discovering where that is and kind of why it's there and how long it's been there and kind of what's the history of how it got started being uncomfortable with you. And so the second question I get kind of dovetails into this, and that is, what causes low self-esteem? And the simple answer is your experience. You have gone through life, and something that you've experienced or interacted in the world has somehow given you information or feedback about you that says not good. Now, it's tricky because, as a middle-aged person going through life, I get feedback all the time that I mess up or that I didn't do something right. But at my stage of life, I sort of know who I am. I've done a lot of therapy to know who I am. But I don't take that feedback in the way an 8-year-old would or the way a 16-year-old would. When you are a young person and you're taking in feedback up from the world, you often are filtering it, and you are at a stage of life where you're really trying to figure out who you are. Am I good? Am I likable? Am I attractive? Will they pick me to be on the team? Do people approve? And so on. And so depending on when you learned about yourself and took in information about yourself is going to affect this piece about self-esteem. Usually the rule is that when we're younger, we're more vulnerable because we don't know who we are. Before puberty and before adolescence, we are highly dependent on the elders and caretakers in our lives to tell us who we are. If we get a lot of feedback that's negative, we come to think that we're not good. If we get a lot of correction, we begin to think that we're not competent, and so on. But if that feedback comes at a different age, like when we are seeking approval from our peers and we're trying to belong and fit in, something else a different message can come in. And so a lot of the questions about where poor self-esteem come from really goes back to, well, how old were you? And also, what are your symptoms? So I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more. The third question I get a lot is there something wrong with me for feeling like there is something wrong with me? Or is there something wrong with me for feeling that I'm not good enough? And my immediate answer is always no, there's nothing wrong with you. If you're suffering, though, from low self-esteem, then let's call it what it is. That's called suffering. Okay, so if I'm suffering because I don't like myself, I don't feel good about myself, that is not a good thing. Okay, to suffer when you don't have to, that's not a good thing. And the good news is that you don't have to suffer if you have low self-esteem. Therapy is a well-known way to improve your self-esteem because therapy asks you to look at how you develop that low self-esteem. And the therapist goes through a process of learning about you from you and understanding who you are and how you think about yourself, and also what circumstances trigger the low self-esteem. Is it when you're sitting there working on something and you become frustrated because you can't figure it out, and this happens a lot to you? Or is it because you're in a social situation and you feel that people are picking on you or laughing at you or mocking and ridiculing you? Or is it coming from a situation where others are relying on you, like a team setting or a work situation or in a family, and they keep giving you negative feedback that you're not meeting their expectations or pulling your own weight or something like that? A lot of it depends on what triggers it. And then the therapist will help you to kind of look at what it is that you see inside yourself that you don't like. Because that's really what it comes down to. There's going to be something about you that, like I said, a part of you is seeing. And therapy can help you bring yourself together because there are different parts of you, right? And bring in the part of you that sees something negative and doesn't like it, right with that part of you that is maybe feeling less than or not good at or lacking confidence or whatever it is. Therapy will help you integrate and live at peace within yourself. One of the things about building self-esteem is to figure out where the self-esteem is showing up. So is it happening when I compare myself against others, or is it happening when I'm in a certain role? Because if it is, then we want to look at, well, what am I doing compared myself to others? Should I be comparing myself? So if I'm on a team and I'm comparing myself to a team, that's okay to do. Am I one of the worst players? Am I the average player? Or am I an exceptional player? And how am I performing? So sometimes what we can do to build our self-esteem is we can try to improve our performance. The question I get a lot is, how can I build my self-esteem? One simple way to do that is to gain confidence in performance. I may feel better when I compare myself against others and realize that there are people that I do better than, and that can give me perspective on myself. I could also feel worse about myself because maybe I feel I don't measure up. Self-esteem really comes back to how we feel about ourselves. It really does. Are we still looking outside of ourselves for approval? That's the question I ask a lot of, because sometimes when people suffer from low self-esteem, what they're really telling me is that they can't get the approval that they want from others, or that they're obsessed with getting approval from others. They do all kinds of things to get people to notice them and give them good reviews. So when that's happening, there's kind of energy inside of us that is looking outward for affirmation or approval. It's important to notice if that's happening for you, because one way to gain self-esteem is to understand what's motivating it. Am I really looking outside myself? Am I seeking permission from others? Do I look outside for approval? Do I need affirmation and seek it? And do I lack self-permission? A lot of people who struggle with self-esteem do lack self-permission, or are kind of always looking outside of themselves. That's an important clue, because they'll say, like, why do I do that? And most people are adults when they are coming into therapy and talking about that. And adults legitimately are asking, like, why would I do that? That's something that children do. That's exactly right. And so one of the things that therapists do, and I would encourage you to do, would be to take some time and to reflect on your own development as a human being. We all go through a stage of life where we look up. We look up to our parents, to our elders. We need to know what they think about us. Look, Mom, look, Dad. It matters when we're young if they come to our game or they see the recital and they're there. It matters if at dinner time we tell a joke, our parents laugh, even if we're young and don't know how to tell jokes yet. That's a stage of life. And If we don't get enough affirmation, approval, and permission to be ourselves, we will forever look for it until it's fulfilled enough inside of ourselves. Now, that's kind of a radical thought. It means if you're still looking outside of yourself, you haven't fully made it through a developmental stage. And this is why you can't help it. It's as though there's a program running inside of you that says, find that affirmation and get enough of it so that you can finally take a rest and trust that you're good. And we've never found that, and we get caught in loops, and we just never get there. So this is an important thing to see a therapist about, because it's nearly impossible to do this on your own. But if this sounds like I'm describing you, then the therapist will help you like the ghosts helped Scrooge. We all know the story of Ebenezer Scrooge, right? How he was this horrible miser that made his workers work on Christmas Eve and keep them away from their family. And he was a notoriously greedy, miserly man who lived alone and who said, bah humbug, and never had any joy, never had any interest in others, had no Christmas spirit. And as the story goes, Scrooge was visited by the ghosts of Christmas present and Christmas past and of Christmas future. Well, therapists are a lot like that ghost. They take the client on a journey, often through their current life, through reflection and remembering, but also backwards in time to earlier stages. And the therapist helps the client see themselves. And to help improve your self-esteem, it's often important to go back and to revisit the stages of development where you were taking into yourself the feedback, the emotions, the experiences that you had with those that you looked up to, and to reflect on what were the messages, what were the feelings that I had inside my body at dinner table, or so on. And it's very common that we uncover criticism or disinterest or favoritism or high expectations of performance and the like. And a lot of it's not designed to blame your parents. It's this kind of examination is designed to give you insight into why you might still be looking for that affirmation if you never got enough of it. And so the therapy will help you to take a different look at yourself through the eyes of the person you are today, and to see that person that you once were, usually as an innocent child that simply wasn't getting what he or she needed. And in the process of the counseling, come to look at yourself and ask yourself now, does it make sense why you are the way you are? And usually the answer is it really does. And that's where the magic begins to happen and the change comes in, because now that I'm looking at myself and I'm not looking out anymore, I get to decide. And if there's something I don't like, I can decide whether I want to change that, but I no longer have to allow that define me as good. I can see myself as good just because I'm looking at myself and trying to grow. So what are some practical ways to boost my confidence? One practical way is to have a growth mindset. And a growth mindset is something you have to learn. So a growth mindset accepts the fact that everybody is imperfect and flawed, and that this is the human condition. And if you have imperfections and flaws, you belong. Welcome to the human race. There is nothing wrong with you. So when you make a mistake, that is simply evidence that you don't understand something, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's many things that we all don't understand. And so if you make a mistake that really matters, then it's probably worth looking at that mistake to learn what you need to learn in order to improve your performance. And so a growth mindset looks at mistakes as opportunities, not as evidence that there's something bad about you, but as opportunities to grow and to improve. So then you can begin to allow yourself to make mistakes and lower the pressure on yourself. Mistakes aren't bad. We don't have to hide them. Now, mistakes do have negative consequences, and there are times when we want to avoid those consequences. So it's understood why some mistakes we want to, we go, whew, I'm glad nobody saw that one. That's often more about embarrassment and wanting to be seen in a good light. The growth mindset says, if we get seen in a not so good light, that's okay. It's evidence of our humanity. Smile and accept it. More people around you relate to that than you know. You're in good standing. Now, there are people in life who don't feel that way, who will attack you and criticize you, judge you and condemn you and tease you and ridicule. Recognize that those people who do that have a problem, and recognize that when they do that, it doesn't reflect on you, it actually reflects on them. So that's a really big shift in a growth mindset. When I'm not looking up for approval, then when I feel that ridicule coming at me, I can reject it. When I'm looking out for approval and ridicule comes, I often take it in and it feels like evidence that there's something wrong with me. And that is a serious problem and something that's worth changing. When you develop a growth mindset, though, you allow yourself to make mistakes and you discover that you attract others who do the same. And so it's safe. The third thing I would say is commit to some area of growth. And commitment simply means a conscious decision to look at an area that is maybe less than I want it to be, and to accept that it is, and to maybe say, I'm a beginner. It's okay to be a beginner. I'm beginning. And if I want to be advanced, then I'm going to make a commitment to move from a beginner to an intermediate to an advanced person and then to a master. It's going to take me time. So a growth mindset understands that all growing is a process and that it takes time and that we go through phases. And we understand that being at a phase is not evidence of something about us. It's evidence that whatever this thing is hard for us and that there's a lot to learn. And so we settle into that and say, it's okay to be a beginner. There is a lot to learn. I have a lot to learn. Now, if we get discouraged because we're not making the results we want, maybe this is something that's really hard for us. Maybe there are other things that are easier for us. There are some people who are not very musical, and learning music is extraordinarily hard, where other people are very gifted and it's easier for them. Sometimes recognizing that we have an area that we're just not good at and it will take us a lot harder can sometimes be the thing that gets us to say, maybe I don't want to do this. And that's great, because we really ought to do the things that we love and that fill us and that maybe we have an area of talent in. Now, sometimes we have to perform in an area that we don't have talent or particular giftings in, and it's just hard, like math. It's hard for most people, and we need it. So in those areas, we just have to accept, hey, this is hard. It's hard for everyone. It's hard for me, and it may always be that way, but that doesn't mean anything bad about me. So that's what this growth mindset is. It's just like, this is something I don't like, but I gotta learn it, and I accept it, and I'll do the best I can. I may not enjoy it, and I may not have my heart in it, and that's okay. So when I find something, though, that I love, that I'm also kind of good at and can learn, then I can shift my focus towards improving. And when I do that, I have to be balanced. I have to look at myself and I have to notice the good, even if it's just I put forth effort. I then can notice the bad too, but I want to think in shades of gray. I want to think of like, I did badly, but I'm a beginner. That's normal. There's nothing wrong with me, instead of beating myself up. And so these are some of the steps that you can take. Now, if these steps are difficult or they fail and there is some kind of a deeper issue, then I would say seek therapy. Because what often people report is they have this inner critic that yells or screams or talks to them and makes them feel horrible or makes them second guess themselves. That happens, and when that happens, you want to seek some therapy. How can I stop comparing myself to others? People come to me all the time and say, I can't stop comparing myself against other people. When I get around people who are better than me, I feel so intimidated. I'm pretty good at this thing that I do, but when I'm around others who are better, I feel like I shut down. I'm worried that people are watching me. I can't perform because I'm comparing myself against others, and it makes me have anxiety. Well, one thing I would say to you is that, again, recognize that there is a stage of human life where that's what we do. Now, that stage sometimes goes back to human development. Like, we compare ourselves when we're young. And when we're young, just about everything that happens in our life is kind of about us, even though that's not true. So like, we know that when parents get divorced, kids blame themselves. But they do that because kids think everything is about them. If something bad happens, they wonder if they caused it. So this idea of comparing ourselves at that stage is different than, say, in our adult life, we take a new job and we have new things to learn that we've never learned and we certainly aren't good at. And we're working around others who are at different stages than us, have been doing it for a while, have more talents or have mastered it. Well, when we compare ourselves against those folks, that's a little different because hopefully as an adult, we understand this is only about a process. I'm a beginner, they're more advanced, I'm right where I should be, and we don't feel self-esteem issues. But if we as adults do feel deep self-esteem issues, it's probably because there's a piece of us from an earlier stage of human development that never really resolved and felt good about who we were becoming in relationship to others. And that often goes back to adolescence, because adolescence is that time when what really matters isn't so much what the adults think, it's what our peers, our equals, it's what they think about us. And so we are putting ourselves out into the group. We do want to know, does the group accept me? We also want to know, can I still be myself when the group all wants to do this? Can I say no and be myself, and will they still accept me? And will they choose me? And all those other questions about, do I belong? Do I fit? Can I hang? That's where that time of comparison is so critical. And teens need reliable adults in their lives to help them make sense out of their experience. So when it comes to comparing ourselves, if a teenager gets reliable adult help, they will learn that, hey, you still need to be the person that you are. And there comes a point where you have to really be who you are, even if the rest of the group says, we don't like how you're being right now. That's the worst thing to face as a teen, but sometimes that's the thing you have to face in order to really become yourself. You may have to step away from a group because you realize these really aren't my people, because these people won't let me be who I really am. That's a very courageous and difficult thing. But when a young person can learn to do that, they can do that and accept that who I am is important and valuable, and trust that there are others like me out there. I don't know too many teens that can do that on their own. You may discover, if you're comparing yourself to others, that what I'm talking about may actually relate to you in some way. That there could be a way in which you don't have a growth mindset and you don't fully embrace the idea that your flaws are okay and stuff like that. Or there could be this deeper kind of developmental piece where when you were young, you struggled to really be yourself and also be accepted. And when a teenager can't do that, a teenager tends to give in to the forces of conformity, and they tend to look over at others and see what are they doing and figure out, what do I have to now do so that I can be part of, so that I can belong and be valued. That's a really important force that drives human beings. And if that never got resolved, and I'm forever looking around and trying to figure out, how do I fit in? What do I do? And that's kind of a self-esteem issue that goes back to a developmental stage. How to figure out if that's you? Try to move into a mindset where you decide if you're okay with you, regardless of what others think. So separate the fact that you may admire other people and you may look up to other people from the fact that you're an individual who is different from them. Notice whether or not you're comparing yourself because you're a beginner and they're maybe not, and that all you need to do is to improve. Or if there's something else. So you want to seek the good that's in yourself and also notice the flaws. Ask yourself, can I improve these flaws? If you can, try to learn from them, try to grow, seek help. Sometimes you can't change your flaws. So if you can't, can you accept yourself? This is how I am. And can you be at peace? Not this is how I am and be discouraged, but can you be at peace with how you are and work through whatever grief you have until you can fully accept yourself, because that's what's necessary. Now, if you can't move into that mindset, it means you can't really decide for yourself who you are and whether you're acceptable. So the question I would have is, well, what stops you? Is there an inner critic? Do you have envy? Do you have strong feelings of inferiority? Do you lack power and control in the situation and you're being held down? Or are you discouraged because you're not able to get the changes you want? As you can see, there's only so much a talk like this can do. My intention is to raise awareness and give you food for thought. And hopefully, if my suggestions help you, you'll see the path. If not, you may need to look at different things about how you came up and how you ultimately came to view and feel about yourself. And I would suggest getting help from a third party who can help see you with kindness and compassion and understanding when you struggle to do that for yourself. Dealing with negative thoughts. Another question I get from a lot of people is, how can I silence my inner critic? I beat myself up. I'm so hard on myself. I hate myself. I go into self-loathing. I can't sleep at night because I'm reviewing the day and looking at all the stupid things I said and beating myself up. If you relate to this, you relate to the idea of having a voice or voices that are like critics that are sitting in judgment of you. And they're very difficult to live with, because if you have an inner critic while you're trying to do some task or perform something or focus or feel good about yourself or sleep at night, that critic can massively interfere. And a self-fulfilling prophecy can occur where, like, I'm really trying to do this, but I'm self-conscious and I'm beating myself up. It affects how well I perform. I perform poorly, and then I beat myself up more. And then I don't even try to improve. And so I never get better, and I just keep beating myself up. If you can relate to the trap that I'm describing, then stay tuned, because you have an inner critic or two. So can inner critics be silenced? Well, yes, they can, but it's not by force. It's not by the traditional methods of conflict. The only way I've ever seen to silence an inner critic is actually to turn towards it and try to understand it first. Seems counterintuitive. We're trying to get rid of this voice, but we need to turn towards the voice. You can already tell that there's two parties involved here, right? There's the voice that you hear, but there's you turning towards that critical voice that's oddly you. So a lot of people get confused. The way I like to say it is like, look, you have an inner critic that's just a part of you. There's also a part of you that it's criticizing, isn't there? And then there's you that can witness it all. So turning towards a critic means trying to be curious about it, which means you have to put aside your desire to stop hearing the critic. You have to put aside your desire to immediately silence the critic and actually open yourself towards the critic and say, hey, okay, you see something really negative here. First of all, what is it that you see that is so unacceptable or so problematic? So you're trying to have a conversation with your own critic. You're trying to get into the head of the critic and ask, what is it that you really dislike? What are you focused on? What's this other part of me that you don't like? Maybe it's how I perform. It's always interesting to discover what is the focus of an inner critic. Is it how I perform socially, or is it how I perform in my job or some role? Is it having to do with something that gets me rejected or accepted? What is it that I am doing, or how am I being in the world that my critic goes, ugh, and judges and criticizes me? So we want to try to listen to that. And then, and this is the odd part for most people, we want to try to understand, is there a good reason? What is the good reason that I have all this energy inside of me that is focused on this one thing or these many things? What's the good reason? And I can't tell you how many times I've done that with people, and they said, you know, I criticize myself because I keep putting my foot in my mouth, and it keeps getting me in trouble, and I do this all the time. That actually makes a certain amount of sense. If you put your foot in your mouth a lot, that can get you into some socially awkward positions. So, okay, now at that point, hopefully we can just thank our critic, go, thank you. I'm going to look at the fact that I do that a lot and try and understand why I do that. And critics will silence when you do that. So the key is to listen to the critic and understand what is the critic's objection and try to understand the good reason. Now, when you can't understand the good reason, then a therapist is usually required because it's just not making sense to you. So a third party or a qualified therapist would help. So now if you can though, sometimes you can validate the critic. You can say things like, you know, I do show up late a lot. I do lose things. I am disorganized. It is problematic. People are giving me negative feedback about that. That's true. I should probably change this in order to have better relationships. And the inner critic will go, yes. Now, if we're fortunate enough to be able to figure out what it is that the critic doesn't like and find the good reason for it and validate it, that's a way to silence the critic. But you can see it causes us to become accountable now. It's like a piece of us is trying to hold us accountable and say, hey, something's not okay here. We got to do something about this. Some people struggle at that point. There is resistance to being accountable. There's resistance to change. And so it gets tricky. And so the critic can come back.